Yaito uses her wealth to get a collection of disposable auto-navis for the group to spar against in prep for the tournament, making sure they're all improved for the competition they know is going to result. All the training, though, leaves the kids exhausted for their normal day-to-day, Mesa noting the decline in their health, even though he has zero interest in their hobby, at least until Mariko says she's going to come along to cheer her students on.
Because she's nice like that.
Though they've got a bit of a problem on the registration front, as Higura's closed his shop down the last few days in his own effort to update Numberman's version data to compete himself. World 3 also wants in on the action of the tournament, both as a chance for them to actually improve themselves, but also to assert their own dominance and potentially get rid of Rockman as well. But unfortunately, with the exception of Hinoken and Fireman, they all specialize in dirty tricks to win fights, where a structured legal tournament would be formally against such happening, and would immediately disqualify any such competitors who do such.
Wait, what am I talking about? This is an anime tournament. Of course something nefarious is going to go down as part of or be behind it. Except for My Hero Academia's Sports Festival arc, because that was a complete subversion of that idea, and thus part of why it was so good.
But that's not all! As Saloma and Miyuki are called away from their cover identity jobs to meet with their boss, the invincible, the enigmatic, the mysterious, Commander Beef!
It's Mesa in a helmet and sweater cape. It's like, not even subtle. And if there is one thing I absolutely hate and cannot stand about the first season, it is this subplot.
Okay, look, being undercover net agents trying to suss out threats on the down low, considering most people have navies, that kinda makes sense to not want to immediately out yourself as having the ones often involved in net saver activities, but come on! The commander for this group being the guy that hates technology and common trends, and thus far has been nothing but comic relief about that fact. Sorry, you gave him one character trait and emphasized that one character trait over everything else, and it's one that's such an irritant that showcasing it's just a cover just doesn't work.
Now, if you had him aware of such things around him instead of being so stubbornly obstinate to the point he's willfully ignorant, you could have framed it as him just not having it as an interest and his work is more important to him, which would naturally blend into the actual character he has. For performing the duties of an undercover net savior, being that work would fit all of that, instead of exaggerating a cover identity to the point it's a farce. There's something to be said of it being so unbelievable it just wouldn't connect at all, but the problem of that is, these three have mostly been useless or not done anything to resolve the crises their job is meant to deal with. They failed to do their jobs, because they're doing their jobs of staying undercover and left it up to Netto to resolve time and again. Whereas if they publicly showcase their navies and have been in to help by being friends and acquaintances of the point meant to stopping these incidents, they could then leverage that to gather information about their enemies with the first-hand experience while stopping them, without needing to inform anyone that they're secret agents. You see how that would work as opposed to this?
As now, every time any of them wants to help out, they have to stupidly dress up in disguises that in no way hides their identities, as their distinct characteristics are still fully visible for all to see.
It's so stupid! And again, Netto and company have been doing their jobs for them, to the point he's later deputized and replaces them in their duties entirely.
Anyways, to get back to the plot, Higure finishes his upgrades, leading to Numberman going completely nuts and screwing over anything that's number-based on the nets.
Yeah, that's what it says. That must be really good chocolate.
And we do not want to see Numberman bug style. Just think, he could actually divide by 0.
The only thing Higure can think of that they might be able to lure Numberman back with is a super complex calculation. For ultimately, Numberman is a number muncher.
Unfortunately, none of Yaito's computers could install DOSBox to run a copy of Number Munchers, so they were stuck with the Shepherd Software online app.
Nah, they go with the old standby of calculating the exact value of pi, which to be fair, while it is a cliche, it's a cliche that makes sense considering the insane time and power that it takes a computer to calculate. And sure enough, it allows them to corner him.
The problem is with society. How can someone believe 2 plus 2 is fish, or the earth is flat, or all these squares make a circle?
But with an N1 starting that day, they're out of time unless Higure wants to disqualify all of them from being able to compete in their matches. And it's actually Toru and Iceman checking up on them after he sees that they hadn't shown up that allows them to get Neverman to cool off from his rampage. But it isn't him that ultimately takes him out. That honor goes to a certain skeleton Navi belonging to Miyuki. With that done, Yaito uses her silly mass transit system to get them there before Dekao's first match is set to start, saving them from disqualification. Thus, let the tournament arc begin. The wrap-up. We have another use of area steal and sword amidst the fighting terrain in Numberman, and that's about it. We have two character introductions, with Miyuki's Skullman, who will play into things later, and that of the frog-themed reporter Karo Midorikawa. Her related Navi Toadman doesn't appear until the second half of the season, though. And I did mention her when she popped up, as she has no actual plot relevance.
A problem she has throughout the .exe anime, unfortunately, at most serving as reporter exposition on stuff instead of the very obvious investigative journalist role she could have had for some later stuff, such as how she was cut out of a chance to join Team Cross Fusion in Stream despite being one of the party members for the counterpart team in Battle Network 5.
And lastly, we have Berserker Mode, for Neverman going nuts after spending too long in a Navi customizer. There's a reason it's locked to a maximum of 25 spaces, Higure. Keep it limited to that. As the last episode before the tournament arc actually starts, it's a stock affair in that there's almost always some sort of complication before a tournament arc actually starts. At most, it introduces the concept of versioning up prior enemies' data so they can become stronger over time, a facet the series would end up reusing infrequently to recreate new versions of old antagonists. Just with a new trick or two for them to fit into the Lensman's arms race, the series' power scaling later becomes. It's somewhat skippable if you just want to get to the tournament fights, unless you actually care about Numberman.
Which most people don't until they have to worry about Number Soul. Fools! He's not the Brakeman! See, because that's a Mega Man song by the band The Megas.
So the tournament begins, finally, with Netto looking on at Toru's opponents, only to find Miyuki playing Seer and telling the outcomes of battles before they happen. And sure enough, Iceman's glass cannon nature turns the battle around, just as Miyuki predicted.
Are they just giving me the music reference jokes in this episode?
Even so, Miyuki seems to be the only one of the three agents that doesn't really seem to get why they're spending so much time on following Netto around in everything thus far. He's nothing of note to her, a position likewise echoed to some amusement in Ryo Takemisaki's manga. In this case, it having to do with Netto half-assing his actions and not taking anything seriously, which we've seen really isn't the case. Though speaking of, Higure comes to Netto and gives him a new chipset in thanks for earlier, a stack of mini-bombs, the most dirt common battle chip there is.
At least give him a freaking copy of Longsword or something!
But Netto's up against Miyuki next, so it's time to see if he can't break her predictions of absolute victory.
Now, did you predict that part, or did you put your own biases upon that prediction?
This is where we get a formal introduction to the tricky Skullman, who immediately disassembles himself to break Rockman's bones with his bones. If Navis have bones, at least. The Navi moving so fast he comes off as invisible, and for an agile-type Navi to not be able to keep up in a contest of speed is just embarrassing, especially considering what happened before with Blues. And while the shots do no damage, the smoke generated on the field makes tracking Skullman's movements disturbing that smoke easier to do. Just an example of the off-the-wall thinking that makes Netto a respected opponent by multiple sides here. But despite the hits, Skullman still has too much of a speed advantage, and when he goes in the attack, Rockman isn't able to block. Comboing Area Steal and Sword only momentarily shifts the advantage, before it's retaken by Skullman due to them having a predictable pace to their attacks. The protagonist pair losing morale in the face of Miyuki's reading of the future, beginning to screw with him. Left with no other option, Netto just starts spamming the mini-bombs, generating the same smoke to be able to target Skullman, and then ambushing him directly with even more mini-bombs instead of relying on close combat again. While it wasn't a killing blow, Miyuki got what she needed, and the shift in Netto's strategy on the fly to defy her predictions makes her see what Saloma does. With Netto's tenacity to pull off a win no matter what, the odds are, making her reconsider him half-assing everything. The wrap-up. We have 2 new battleships used in mini-bombs and demon fire. Mini-bombs have on occasion been seen before, but never as a chipset, so I had no reason to count it. But so many were used in rapid succession, I have no way to count how many chips he burned through. We're gonna mulligan it, though, and say he just used all 10 chips Higuri gave him. We have a screw you to fate, for Netto defying the destiny of others designed to make his own. I generally hate "you were fated to this fate" plots in media, as often prophesized stuff almost always goes the same way. Use until it's contradicted, then made to not matter. It's rare any original takes, say how it ends up used responsibly in My Hero Academia with Sir Night-Eye's abilities, seem to pop up, so it's an old hat trick by this point that, like luck powers, allows a writer to shortcut to god-modding badly awful written events to occur. It can single-handedly wreck a show if it's left in the wrong hands. Episodes along this arc are going to naturally have shorter reviews besides them, as there's only so much you can do to recap a fight scene before you're just restating what happens blow for blow in more time than the episode takes to showcase that. But at the very least, this begins to resolve what I said was a problem with the series early on, and the lack of time spent on actual fights being terrible. Now, the entire show is shifted to revolving around drawn-out net battles as its focus in the tournament. So plot progression slows to a crawl while we're along it, as every fight has to be done quick to not become an obtrusive slog. On one hand, it technically makes my job easier to get these out. On the other, you're not getting much in the way of critiquing. On the bright side, by the story forcing Netto into new situations, it helps create development with him, with his quick thinking and limited resources being expanded upon that would pay off down the line. You just don't see it right now because, well, you expect tournament arcs to happen later after the cast have learned something, or if it's done early, it being a key to getting them training, instead of a bump on a road along the trials to both as it is here.
だいたい胸もお尻もぺったんこだし、顔はまあまあだけど色気ゼロ。ま、100点満点で20点ってとこかしら。
人に点数つけるなんて失礼じゃない。おばさん。おばさん。
Yeah, you can tell this is going to go.
We continue the N1 with the battles in the midst of intermission, the girls browsing the gift shop, and encountering Midori in one of her fouler moods, who is then blinded by Yaito's enormous forehead.
Yeah, some people can just not pull off having bangs. Case in point.
No, Midori's actually here to get under male skin before they end up facing off.
今日の対戦楽しみにしてたんだけど、こんなガキンチョが相手とはな。
Once again, only fools antagonize the Soon.
負けない。色合いや惑いだけには絶対負けない。
Soon!
And to help out Male on the path of revenge, Yaito's got some chips for her to use, as no one makes fun of her hairstyle. I'm intentionally skipping over the gag part of this episode where Male and Midori take turns insulting each other's age and attractiveness. It's just embarrassingly dumb, and once more the work of Mayuri Sekijima, who's disappointingly known for that kind of thing across a number of series they've worked on, especially since this type of catfight is just petty.
No one cares!
Those things get underway, Netto sees that Commander Beef, you know what, not dealing with it, Mesa has won his first match as well, with an impressive time of just 7 seconds in the match. But he doesn't have time to dwell on that, as he's in the first match of round 2, where Hinoken is finally getting his proper rematch with Netto and Rockman, while the girls are wrapping up the first round with theirs. And sure enough, Rockman vs. Fireman is a hell of a better exchange than they had either of the last times, it actually coming off as an actual battle instead of a pair of uneven curb stomps. Whereas Roll, in comparison, is off to a far worse start against Colorman, if only because his and Midori's tactics are more esoteric, and thus harder to fight in a direct manner, especially for a support-type Navi.
There is no such thing as ready in combat. Either you can fight at a moment's notice, or you can't. What?
Yeah, it's clear that Roll lacks true battle experience several times here. As though she dodges Colorman's ball, when it hones back in on her, she freezes up even though she avoided the attack the first time. Mail isn't much help here either, as instead of telling Roll to move or operating her to perform that action, she just yells at her Navi. I think that's why the production team intercut these two fights together, both as contrast between skills and powers between Netto's group and World 3's agents, and also the individuals themselves. What irks me about this is all of them complaining about fighting fair, and how Midori is not doing so, except everything she's doing is in the rules of the fight. If a Navi's surrendering, they log out, not plead for mercy as Colorman did to trick Roll. It's her own fault for falling for it in a situation where there's no cause for her to, especially as she has to have been in some way informed of Midori's tactics from the past encounters with her Navi. Though that Midori and Colorman still have to rely on such to get an advantage is likewise not a good sign for them, since as part of Roll's moveset, she can charm viruses and object summons, to Colorman's own detriment. In short, she should worry less about what's fair, and learn to be just as crafty to reach her goals.
分身を使った攻撃はネットバトルでよくあることで、決して反則ではないでます。
Exactly!
Whereas over in the main attraction, Rock and Fireman are still at it, now trading fire from a distance with their respective ranged weapons, with the match still near dead even. How, when it's not gone well for them before, to the point Rockman needed help in the last encounter? It's simple. Ridiculously exhaustive training powered by passion. The passion for revenge. Though at this point, Midori finally actually does cheat, bouncing light off a mirror straight into Mail's eyes so she can't properly operate Roll, leaving her wide open. Now, anything aside the system they pull is fine, but messing with their opponent like that? Yeah, no, some kind of judge or moderator should be stepping in. That they aren't is just embarrassing for the integrity of this tournament. But it ends up backfiring regardless, as hopefully she ends up actually bouncing her blinding right back in her face, thanks to it reflecting off of Yaito's enormous forehead.
What skincare product does she use in that dome of hers anyways?
トリプルランススラットインアーバルボーイサーダトリプルランス
So with Meru securing her place in the second round, it's up to Rockman to bring it all home, the episode ending in a clash of fire and elect swords. We then pick up where we left off with Rockman versus Fireman, Rockman evading Fireman's flame shots with his spare arm and breaking through with a charge shot. Though while Fireman appears to be on the defensive, Hinoken's got an ace up his sleeve. Specifically, Hinoken running a program that screws with the solar power generation system of the N1 stadium to then affect the environmental controls, sealing the entire stadium in as hostages for the hollow generation system to create an artificial sun, and ramp up the heat in the place immensely. All of which supercharges Fireman's capabilities as the area has been affected to give him the boost. So once again, Rockman is left at a disadvantage.
Dude, instead of doing this, you could have just changed the field into a lava map using an area of effect battle chip. Those exist, you know. Lava panels are a pain to deal with.
That leaves every other competitor to, in turn, deal with Hinoken's virus outbreak that's interfering with the match, and threatening to toast everyone. Netto, of course, is getting the worst of it. He's next to the artificial sun, after all, and he doesn't have the heat tolerance that Hinoken does. Until ultimately, he collapses. Mesa and Sharkman assist in cleaning out Hinoken's viruses, but it's only from Netto fighting through his sunstroke and triggering a group of bombs to block Hinoken's attacks that they are able to bring it back, countering Fireman for the final time with the use of Wide Sword, cutting him in two, and securing a slot in round 3.
エンザンショーとしては最高だったよ最低の試合だった何
Okay, now you're being an outright dick, Enzan. Not even bothering to elaborate this time. I mean, his enemy did cheat in the battle to get him a power boost. It's not exactly easy to come back from that if you don't have some form of overwhelming power.
Speaking of overwhelming power, Numberman versus Woodman. And that's all she wrote for that match. The wrap-up. 2 new chips in the form of Trilance and Fire Sword. I know for a fact Fireman has a Fire Sword chip in this series, so that's why I'm counting it. Color Man's abilities for the most part thus far haven't been shown to be chip-based, which is why it's always a nuisance to keep track of specials that are from the series' collectible gimmick. Sometimes you just do not know. We have a Soon Soon award, once more for male, because she is Soon Soon. We have a generic insulting beauty cat fight. Please, for the love of sanity, let this not be a thing for much longer. And we have Cheaters Never Prosper, with Midori only losing because she did so. The Rube. Whereas Fireman needed to actually outmatch Rockman, the short time it lasted. This served as the series' first real two-parter, with me condensing them both here simply because, well, I had a total of a page and a half in the latter due to how long the fight was, and what little else plot relevant there was to recap again. And I'm not entirely sure why they did so, since the Fireman vs. Rockman stuff could seriously have been saved for just the full second episode to better pace it, as most tournaments don't start the second round until after the first has completely concluded so they can properly match up all the pairings. As otherwise, the first competitors have the longest recovery time between matches, while the last ones to then go accordingly have the least, which by rules lawyering makes everything too lopsided to even pretend to be fair. I feel we missed a lot to the fight with Fireman as a result of this, while also stealing away time from the girls in their shot to shine, since Midori is supposed to be the super competent one of Wily's minions, whereas here it's all just about her vapid vanity. A disappointment to be sure, even if it is continuing Male's own arc to find herself and be recognized as a competent net operator in the tournament. Though how she got the requisite wins to even rank in the competition if that's her showing is a bit beyond me. And of course, we have Enzan being a dick at the end. I won't deny that he in part did have a point with Netto's lack of action here. After all, from how Enzan was introduced, he had high expectations of what Netto and Rockman are capable of, and they just aren't meeting them. He only won against Skullman due to forfeits, and he probably expected Rockman to put down an enemy he'd faced before far faster than he did, even if said enemy had gotten a power boost from the version up. I view him as being more disappointed than anything, though the fact he refused to elaborate on what he meant is not exactly conducive to that interpretation, nor how little Enzan's actually featured in the series thus far, where the depiction of his rivalry could go either way. Regardless, that's for the rest of this arc to more flesh out, beginning in turn with a street fight. With the first day of the N1 Grand Prix over and done with, and the crew winning the matches they need to progress, mostly, it's time for the crew to celebrate their success while they wait for the next scheduled day of matches, which are being hosted intermittently and not consecutively because I have no idea.
Scheduling conflict, possibly? The end of the last episode said to be back in 2 days next week. The show early on does that kind of fourth wall breaks off enough you could mistake it for one of those, as opposed to Midori Kawa actually telling people to come back for the next scheduled day in literally a week.
Also, out of nowhere, Higuri is stealing Midori Kawa's job. Like, why? This is her one sole role in the series. Don't snipe her purpose in life like that. That's a massive dick move, dude. But it turns out Wily has another reason for entering his minions into this tournament. Yes, all of a sudden he has an actual motivation. Wily believes that one of the competitors must possess some type of ultimate program that makes them so strong, which he can claim for himself in a later scheme. Thus, with 2 of his minions out of the running, he also has some ringers entered as well, who are disguised in silhouettes.
It's Stone Man and Bomb Man. What, Wily has only so many minions, and this sect of the series is mostly limiting itself to characters introduced in Battle Network 1. Hell, most Battle Network 3 and Network Transmission navis don't show up until Access due to production issues, where the anime's writers didn't have the details on them until a bit before the public did. And that game didn't release for a bit yet when this was airing.
Well, at least the downtime allows Netto to get some new options for battle. Yuichiro sending him the chip data for Longsword, so everyone familiar with the games should know what is coming.
ソード系チップなら結構持ってるのに。
Dude, you had 3, now have 4, each of which does something different. You can talk about having too many swords when you complete a set of the element swords, the element blades, the life blades, slasher, custom sold, both variable swords, step sword, katana, muramasa, kunai, and... okay, I could just keep naming off sword chips, as there are a lot of sword chips. I like sword chips!
But Netto's disappointment about not getting something better is tabled as Yaito invites their group to a party to, as said, celebrate their performance. Though I think making reservations at a 5-star restaurant for it is a bit excessive. I think they could have just gone with a pizza party or something. As he heads out for it, though, Netto runs into Saloma, voicing his earlier surprise about her entrance, and actually managing to ask the question about whether she was the one who was operating Woodman earlier when Elect tried to steal the game from Capcom, with which she's non-committal on providing an actual answer.
A conversation that actually lends credence to my opening statements about Kids WB's mistreatment of the series, and them holding the reins of how the dub was handled instead of Viz Media. In the dub, this dialogue was entirely rewritten to focus around assistance Sal gave Lan during the match with Miyu, assistance she actually didn't give, since the incident in episode Netto is calling back to in this conversation was not broadcast until long after this one was. If said episode was dubbed and just not broadcast, then it not being included screwed with the story. If the episode wasn't dubbed until later and then excluded, then this change makes sense. If the episode was dubbed and then screwed over in scheduling, then it doesn't, and this becomes an unnecessary localization change, as the content they were calling to was just skipped in the short term, but factored into the longer arc, this was needed to remain untouched. Option 1 makes the most sense considering the extreme delays discussed before about the show's DVD releases, but only serves to further highlight why the dub wasn't successful, and in retrospect not liked because it unnecessarily screwed with the story. And it remains an irritant for dub fans that this still happens with modern dub's localization screw-ups unnecessarily changing the story.
With that out of the way, Miyuki and Mesa sneak into Saloma's truck thanks to Netto's distraction, almost killing the lot of them when they scare her, before informing her that World 3 set off a ton of attacks in the last day, but they've been focused on winners in the N1, meaning they're likely trying to get themselves past their losses in the earlier rounds by their members subbing into the open slots. With the kids, they meet up for dinner at Yaito's preferred place to eat out, only to find Enzan there as well, just having finished a meal in the section Yaito's family usually rents. As in the games, Enzan's also a rich kid, the son of the owner of IPC, the hardware producers for public use PET technology, which is such a staple to modern society that it blows Yaito's family wealth from game production out of the water.
And yet not once does Enzan flaunt it, probably because his dad has no inclination to spoil him rotten.
This is, however, more of where we get asshole Enzan, being unnecessarily cruel and insulting to Yai, the restaurants, and even Netto when he calls Enzan out as being a dick, which goes against how the character was far less of a jerk upon the initial introduction.
Thus making me ask for, the third or fourth time on my show when it comes to this specific writer, what the hell, Keiichi Hasegawa?
And like my statement, Netto likewise asks Enzan what is his sudden deal. And here Enzan has a good point. What's gotten under his skin is now Netto has been skirting by, not by his own capabilities, but the charity of others. He saw that Miyuki let Netto win in their match, and against Fireman he wasted his advantages until Hidoken cheated, instead of ending the match fast, to say nothing on how his stamina is crap. Seeing all of Netto's antics in person and failure to beat Magic Man himself, it's landed Enzan in a bad mood over how all of Netto's victories are likely miscredited, and he's taken the reputation and glory that should actually belong to other people that are using him as cover. Case in point, with the Aegis Navies has helped him end incidents as well. Enzan calls him third-rate because he is third-rate from everything showcased, and incapable of winning on his own. Thus, the fight that breaks out between them and their navies makes sense. Netto is out to actually prove himself, while Enzan wants to stop being pestered by someone he's realized isn't a competent rival who could help him improve, but just someone that keeps getting lucky. And it's the perfect time to show exactly how distant the divide between them is. And Blues' speed, alongside Enzan's superior operation skill, mops the floor with him. Even simultaneous use of a second sword doesn't do much to gain any traction, which is just made worse when Stone and Bomb Man sent a horde of viruses at them simultaneously to try and get them out of the competition. The two navies are of course too much for any of them. It's just, there's so many, and Blues has zero experience fighting alongside other navies that it's actually screwing with his ability to fight freely. And with Rockman in danger, Netto sends him the third sword, thus leading to the first, entirely accidental program advance, which erases the weaker viruses, leaving Blues to win the last, stronger one on his own. Unfortunately, because no one in the cast has seen a program advance before, none of them knew how to properly use it, thus the power of the life sword dissipates before Rockman can actually use it in battle. And with the interruption, Enzan holds off on their fight, saying it'll be best to settle this in the tournament. Still, Higuri lets him know about the rumors of program advances and how only a few have been figured out, as they're not pre-programmed among chips to exist, but a resident effect caused by battle chip synergy among chips of common use. And as the pair just showcased, it requires a proper synchronization between operator and Navi to use them in the anime, something the pair just don't have yet. Meaning if they actually want to win the N1, they now have a direction in which to direct their own training. The wrap-up. We have one new chip use in Longsword, though we don't see it as it's cannibalized for the Incomplete Life Sword. I'm not going to be counting incomplete program advances in this, so you'll have to wait until Netto's new training arc bears fruit on that. We have the asshole, to Enzan for being unnecessarily a dick, even if the reasons behind why he is are understandable with a little thought. As unlike in the games where Lan generally is deserving of the praise he's given for the actions he takes in helping people, the anime has less presented that same level of capability, with Netto just being in the right place at the right time to help as an average kid in the setting who is being thrust down the path of greatness thanks to the potential of his Navi. Honestly, this episode needed to happen, not just to give contrast to the gap between where Enzan and Netto along with their Navis are, but also to give a sign of Enzan and Blues' own shortcomings, since they can only effectively fight alone. If anyone's there, say if they need to protect someone else in a chaotic battle, then their capabilities are slashed to pieces. And long term, you can't stay solo alone. From how Enzan was introduced, I honestly do feel the kid's lonely and looking for someone to relate to and challenge himself alongside, but is just horrible in social situations and the candidates that pique his interest and attention missing his expectations by a mile. Even now with him being a jerk, it's hard to legitimately hate him because of the overt allusions to his flaws. Versus the games where he had everything he does early on have him be a complete elitist jackass, which no one can match up to until he's proven wrong and humbled. Whereas the performance of the character by Mitsuki Saiga helps convey that undertone of loneliness about him.
Something about her portrayals that was getting a lot of work out that year between other characters she voiced that were equally isolated or obstinate. Specifically on Tsukasa Shoji in .X Sign and Kaoru Elk and Entrance Ichinose in the just then released IMAC.hack games. Yes, really. There's a reason I like to spotlight voice actors to make allusions to them, as sometimes it ends up really informative over aspects of their performances, or just in-jokes the writers occasionally put in.
With so many of the competitors reduced to remnant data by World 3's virus attacks, half the competition in the tournament is completely gone, thus a reshuffling of the opponent rosters has taken place. Roll and Mail up against Toru and Iceman in their next round, while Higuri is getting used to working alongside Midorikawa and commentating by raving over battle chips. Which of course segues into the necessity for Netto and Rockman to master the use of their battle chips into a program advance to be able to win against the stronger opponents in the tournament.
Unless they have those chips that can pull off the advance as well now that the needed chip combo is known to them, but what are the odds of that happening?
They try the advance, but it still dissipates before it deals any type of damage to Gutsman who they're training against. So while they know what to do, they're not sure how they're supposed to do it. Moreover, we see a setting detail about the battle chips themselves and why they're not recycled endlessly in a battle. Apparently on top of the program for that specific attack being saved on the chip, the data also needs some type of charge stockpiled on it to specifically transmit that data.
Why that is not exactly clearly explained. Hell, it'd make more sense if Navis could only hold a certain amount of chip data in active memory, thus requiring an operator to manually reload the chips as they were used. It would actually explain why Higuri would gift Netto with 10 of the same battle chip, so he'd have the spare ones to spam the bombs.
Now, admittedly later in the series, they more or less excise this entirely. By access, the battle chip limitation for use was 5 because the advanced model PET that was in use at the time could only slot 5 battle chips for use in active memory, and once the data on it was used, it couldn't immediately be used again, as the PET had already read the chip inserted. If they broke from battle, they could reload their active chips without problem, with that limitation later mitigated in its entirety with the introduction of the battle chip gate. By stream and the introduction of the progress PET, that again changes, with the progress PET is allowing for storage of the data of up to 25 battle chips digitally, thus getting around most usage limitations and chip management issues.
And really, the usage limitation and recharge thing were probably an attempt to backwards engineer an explanation for the chip folder game mechanic on why you couldn't just endlessly use any chip you had, thus rationalizing why the story element would later be written out once it had served its purpose.
Anyways, Miyuki and Skullman come in and offer to help them train. They don't have anything better to do right now, and them just forcing out use of the advance again and again isn't going to help them learn how to actually use it, if he doesn't first learn how to use it right. And especially how to use it in a battle situation where Rockman can't just stand still as they're doing it. And Mace is doing his own part in giving Netto the time to learn, by dragging his and Sharkman's match with the anime original Whalemen out to give them the chance.
プログラムアドバンスに必要なのは3つのチップ、スロットインの順番だけじゃない。
You sure? 'Cause that's how every other player does it. The trick is timing.
最も重要なことはタイミングよ。
And by taking the suggestion of learning to synchronize by breathing in time with each other, though really Rockman doesn't breathe, so I don't know how this works, they manage to get close to actually using it. But actual mastery of any advance, even as one as simple yet as powerful as a life sword, is still a ways off. Thus it's ultimately not an option as they're up for a new battle with Magic Man in their round 3. Though as always, Magic Man's only notable ability is summoning viruses through virus chips, which just plain eats Rockman's supply of armaments, as Mahajirama for the first time presents himself as a strategist with his use of anything, and counters them as he uses them, due to all his existing tactics being known.
You know, if he is that shorthanded on available chips to use, it makes me wonder where he got the massive supply of varied chips he starts to use once he becomes a net saver. Probably supplied by the government or something.
Thus, to actually be able to do anything, he has to try something new, or at least something the enemy hasn't seen. So in desperation, and with the training against Skullman in mind, they finally successfully cast... Life Sword.
Well, Beta Sword as it was still being named after the Battle Network 1 version of the Advance, but for all intents and purposes, it's Life Sword.
Unfortunately, while it's usable, it's not as strong as it could be, which will still require more practice, so again, not the first option in a battle where it would still count as a Hail Mary, something Enzan is quick to point out. As in his own battle against Electman, where Electman not only supercharges himself, but jams the side of the battlefield so Enzan can't operate visually.
ライトバーストバリアスロットイン
おい見えないのになぜ
ベータソード
Oh no!
And the difference in strength between the two, mastered and not, is palpable. The wrap-up. We have a ton of chips used this time around, primarily from all the training Netto and Rockman did to even get the Life Sword to work. We have both the first and second successful castings of Life Sword to attack an enemy Navi. We have a training episode because, of course, an anime based around combat of some form always has at least one. We have an Eat the Attack award to Magic Man's viruses. And we have a curb stomp for Sharkman toying with its whale meat meal before going in for the kill. This episode is once more okay. An important piece for not giving Netto the easy way out of a situation under which he has to learn to do something difficult the right way, which helps him along his arc of bonding with Rockman that will once again pay off more later as they start to work more in sync with one another. Though it's my personal opinion on this as well, I don't think Enzan knew about the Life Sword program advance when coming into the tournament, but had not seen one used himself before, and after learning what chip combo was needed, used it himself without fail. While its backstory of intense training with Blues is not expanded upon here to justify his sudden skill at it, it can be inferred by their established greater battle ability that they were already at a level where the synchronization rate needed to achieve the advance properly was already within their capabilities, though for different reasons. Blues is programmed to be subservient to Enzan, thus it's likely instead of two disparate persona working together through a bond to synchronize for the attack, it is a matter of the Navi surrendering one's will and actions to the whims of the operator as if they were a drone, abandoning individuality that will render one out of sync with the other. An idea that actually is explored and expanded upon later in the following season when Access made Enzan and Blues the second characters in the series to successfully be able to perform cross-fusion with their own unique bonds, and it being an aspect informing the Dark Blues storyline that comes later as well. Regardless of that, despite the earned skill Enzan legitimately has, that slave nature to their dynamic inevitably makes something like this easier to pull off, instead of it being because one comes together. So while Netto and Rockman are ultimately focusing on one technique with their training, the actions they are taking inevitably are working to improve others that will make them far more capable in the long run, to be able to soon enough better match up to Enzan. After seeing the show Enzan put on while blind, Netto takes a shot at improving himself by moving around with his signature headband over his head. To little effect, as he just doesn't have the special awareness for it.
Yeah, tip to extra sensory perception and spatial awareness training, start by learning how to navigate in the dark. Bonus difficulty, leave a bunch of junk on your floor like Lego bricks, and try to avoid stepping on one. What, that's how I developed mine.
Though it might help if he learned to trust the directions Rockman gave, as, hey, this kind of thing, it works as a trust exercise that improved their teamwork for achieving mastery over Life Sword. Though it probably doesn't help that while he was doing this, he forgot about Mail and Toru having it out in the tail end of round 2 of the tournament. It's a match that ends by Mail using one of the chips she got from Yaito, a copy of Cyclone, to redirect Iceman's strongest attacks back at him, and for once freeze the Iceman solid, winning her the round and sending Iceman to the future because Frozen Iceman story. Though as that's going on, 2 other competitors in the training room end up ambushed by their opponents.
Well, to be fair, Battle Network 3 hadn't released yet to tip them off to what the .exe version of the character would properly look like, so mulligan.
Yeah, as established, Stone and Bomb Man don't like to play fair. Thus, when their matches are formally put up, their operators disguised by heavy robes and bandages show up, but the opponents do not, making it so their moves and tactics aren't known by a single opposing competitor. Mahajirama confirms they're agents of Wily's, though, so it's not like we can pretend they're just rogues for another faction everyone has to buff up to potentially beat, though. Might as well keep it simple since the pair have been teased in silhouettes for several episodes as it is.
Nani?
どういうことマジャラマン
とてもまずいカレーだ
And that's actually a plot point for later. No, seriously.
Still, their activity and the way they keep winning is, well, suspicious, to the point even Netto picks up on that fact and the possibility of them being World 3 agents. But with the single elimination matches over and done with, the N1 begins its next stage, a series of tag team matches between randomly paired competitors. One of the first pairings being between Woodman and Gutsman, and their opponents being Stone and Bomberman, meaning it's the first time anyone will probably see these two in action.
And as an aside, Stoneman always just looks so weird in comparison to everything else in this series with rare exception. I think the others that get close are Gravity Man and the Cyber Beast, the Gospel Bug Beast of course included in that. All 4 of them animated with cel-shaded CGI, which makes them pop out of the existing 2D environments and not for the better. A few differing series experimented with this in the 2000s, most notably the Zoids franchise and Transformers Energon, and well, it wasn't good looking a lot of the time, as the integration and difference in quality was pretty noticeable and poor, as the cost of the CGI forced the production to be a lot cheaper and cut corners, with the most general slack given to the Zoids in that as when they did the cel-shaded CGI, they tried to keep it separate from the 2D stuff. So until you got programs that were really good at rigging the models to move naturally like Poser or Autodesk Maya, the latter of which is what's currently used by Rooster Teeth in the production of Ruby, which is cel-shaded CGI, it wasn't good to look at. Hell, for some, it looked worse than fully CG series of the 90s like Transformers Beast Wars and Reboot.
Which of course isn't good for Sebek here, as any new tech for animation just plain eats a budget. The series already had some CG effects for data dispersal of the navis and viruses, which were obviously recyclable in the long term, so only had to be animated once before they could be mapped to other things. Not so Stone Man. Not so much Stone Man, who resultantly couldn't do much but stand there in battles, as his animation cost more than just drawing a cell with details within it digitally, as Sebek did with the rest of the series. Back to the fight, the defensive power of Bomb Man and Stone Man proves itself insane, even against the more power-type oriented Guts and Woodman. However, there are other advantages shown by Mahajirama cutting the cords of the PETs. This pair of World 3 navies are entirely autonomous, unlike other navies who are ultimately stored and operated via the terminals. These two can act entirely independently from operators with no loss to their performance, which, as has been shown throughout the series so far, a Navi without an operator has a massive drop in their capabilities, even disregarding their use of battle chips, with the two's faked-in operators just being a pair of drone robots they use to get around.
Which makes sense. We've seen a few distinct types of robots in the show so far, from the security drone at the waterworks to the robot fish and toy pets. With Wily still being a robotics engineer in the pocketbook for this series, it is totally in character for him to build a pair of them so his true autonomous minions could evade suspicion. Gee, it's a good thing Mahajirama didn't out their secret identities when he had no actual cause to do so. Seriously, why the hell is that idiot in charge of the original 3?
The auto navies entirely curb-stomp their opponents, leading to a clean sweep in the round for the pair, and a duality of trouble on the horizon, as no one has greater raw strength left in the tournament but them. The wrap-up. 3 new chips debut in this episode: Ice Block, Cyclone, and Guts Hammer. Again, with the first and last having seen used before, I can only really count them as battle chips when the series distinguishes them as battle chips. And Gutsman's Mega Guts Punch and Guts Hammer are just as often counted as default abilities as they are separate chips, so it's near impossible to tell the difference if it's not being slotted. We have an I, Baby award to Bomberman and Stoneman, both being fully actualized solo AI not reliant on squishy humans for their power, the first ones to show up in this series. Sure, other navies have personalities and independent capabilities, but they're still driven and connected inevitably to an operator. Even Rockman, as advanced and actualized as he is, suffers that same limitation. More would resultantly follow in the series, for better and worse, but Stoneman and Bomberman were the first we'd seen for any extended period. And lastly, we have Villain Faceplant, once again in relation to Mahajirama and outing Wily's special agents as just that when he had zero reason to do so. Seriously, this single person seems to do more to damage the progression of Wily's schemes than any other World 3 agent, despite him being the most dedicated to Wily's cause. What is even the hell? Still, this was a good episode, with it closing the existing monotony of the tournament and trading it out for one that would allow for better character interplay as the personalities mesh and clash in the resulting rounds of combat. And not something seen much of in tournament arc-possessing anime when the character put in it weren't already part of a pre-existing team, such as, say, the Chunin exams in Naruto or the Dark Tournament in Yu Yu Hakusho. Honestly, I kind of find it refreshing, all things considered, to revisit something like this, as limited in scope as it is. So it's time for the next match of the tournament, which features Stoneman and Bombman, again, versus Rockman and Sharkman.
Wait, they just went, and this is the first tag match the latter pair are in. Who the hell is running this tournament to schedule matches like that?
Still, with Mesa relaxing a bit on his habits and being on better terms with the crew since he's been supporting them in the tournament to have at least a little working knowledge in his cover identity of what's going on, he can build some camaraderie with Netto before the match begins with a little fish food, as the rest wonder what's up with Mesa's second identity.
Dude, you do not want to wonder the oddities of cow-thematically related superheroes, especially not one sponsored by Chick-fil-A.
Honestly, while I hate the Commander Beef subplot, the best explanation I have for why it exists is that Mesa is just a complete doofus in both his real life and his cover identity. Ergo, it's just him being a standard goofy goober about the entire thing. That's why he's firing up Netto with speeches about having trust and faith in a supportive partner.
He knows many things about fish and sea wildlife. The jury is still out on everything else.
Of course, this episode is all about hyping up the true identity of Commander Beef, and anyone with a brain, yes, even in the target demographic of this show, could easily figure it out. Hell, I did as a kid. Granted, I was 12 when this aired, but my point still stands. So the match starts, and the Blue Bomber combo versus the Red Bomber combo doesn't start the greatest. The former team just plain blocking and absorbing everything they send at them with the effective Iron Body, before creating a distortion in the field that opens up a backdoor to warp the entire battlefield to another server.
Okay, that has to be against the rules. How are they supposed to moderate a competition that isn't even happening in the designated field?
まさにこれはプロレスばりの場外乱闘出ます。
Higure? Pro wrestling is pretty heavily scripted entertainment. It's all a fake stage show. That's how they get away with a lot of the crap without any refs interfering.
おっと結論が出ました。審判団の協議の結果、ネットナビが試合会場を離れた場合、10分以内に戻ってこなかったチームをリングアウト負けとします。
Wait a second. You're going to disqualify the participants that had nothing to do with everything leaving the boundary field, after two opponents forced everyone out of sight so they didn't have to even entertain the thought about following any of the rules, and set a rule which actively encourages cheating by designating a time limit inside of which they have to be back. Yeah, I see no problems with this whatsoever.
And once again, it's all for the purpose of putting the solo navis in a situation where they're not even pretending to play by whatever rules actually exist for the tournaments, which I don't see the point. They can already crush their opponents just fine without needing to do this. Why risk their own elimination as well if the judges ruled that way? Or worse, against them when they needed to stay in the competition to assert their dominance. It's evil, but it's so short-sighted to not be worth it. And worse, the area they transported them to isn't even far from the stadium. It's in the lighthouse directly overlooking it, so Sharkman can signal Mesa to come and get them. Though it takes battling the robot operators to get through to them.
Okay, to be fair, that sword's actually really well designed for what it is. Seriously, barbed spikes along a blade length are smart if you want extra stabbing and blade catching advantages, even as they risk being torn off from heavier blades as the barbs stick out too far.
And then he also has an electric paralysis net, which is again all fish-themed. Really, he'd draw far less attention to himself if he referred to himself as Commander Shark or some other type of fish-related thing. That way Mesa could use as his cover something along the lines of, "I've known of the Commander for a long time, he inspired me to become a fishmonger," or some other such crap to intentionally invoke an oddity that doesn't risk revealing his identity. As, yeah, amidst the battle, Netto figures out it's Mesa under the mask. Not helped by, well...
Building muscle strength is dependent on proteins and exercise of the related muscles, not bone strength and calcium intake. Though I guess that is advice that Izuku Midoriya could probably use.
Regardless, the human pair defeat the drones, restoring their connection to their navis in order for Rock and Sharkman to bum rush Rockman back to the stadium before the time limit expires, leaving the match ultimately in a draw by Bomberman also making it back. Unfortunately, the damage Sharkman took makes it unlikely he'll be able to compete in the future. But as Netto is as subtle as a bag of hammers, he just straight out outs Mesa as Mesa. Unfortunately, Mesa's subordinates were tipped off, and Miyuki attempts to pull a fast one by dressing up as Mesa to try and protect his identity, just so this stupid subplot would not die, and continue to bog down the series for the full rest of the season, where there was nothing preventing them from ending it here.
And it would eventually be ended! In a filler episode of Access 32 episodes into its run that fell in between two of its major story arcs. Spoilers! No! Netto does not get to gloat about him being right all along. You shouldn't have done it in the first place. Do you have any idea of the status quo changes you wasted? The other means of camaraderie stories lost? Considering this agent trio pointlessly sticks around and Billy does jack all the rest of the series? Let's get out of here.
The wrap-up. We have one new battleship use, that I can tell, has said it's hard with solo navis since they don't slot ships, with Stoneman summoning a bunch of earthquake viruses. Beyond that, just another casting of Shotgun and Aqua Tower. We have an extra dimensional panic for the auto navis trying to pull a fast one. We have a badass superhero award for Mesa going all in on the Batman trick to get around powered robots. And we have the Hugo Strange Award for Netto failing to get anyone to realize the obvious of Bruce Wayne being Batman. As I'm one that's annoyed by the Commander Beef subplot, and I make no attempt to hide my disdain of it, this episode is a complete wash for me, and all things considered a waste of time. Hell, it actually screws up the pace and contiguity of the tournament for the Stone and Bomberman team to fight not one, not two, but 3 matches back-to-back without interruption. Again, a tournament would logically not structure itself like that, and if there are matches going on in between the two's events, yeah, you're not telling us that that's happening. And as nothing is actually accomplished from this episode aside from Sharkman being unable to battle further, and Mesa's secret isn't outed so he doesn't have to hide like a goofy goober anymore, it does absolutely jack all for the series from a story arc or filler episode perspective. I legitimately wish it had been one of the 3 excised from the early side of the series dub, instead of one of the 3 they did, as this ended up being the last episode Kids WB actually broadcast in the US for a full 9 months. It was in all regards a low to end on until it came back, and while I don't have the records for the show's ratings in the US, with how they just plain rushed through what they had left and the poor treatment Access received, I doubt a lot of people were all that thrilled for it to come back unless they were actively playing the GBA games by this point.
Which I personally was, that's why I continued with it. But do you get why I keep calling this the bad half of a mediocre season, dragging down an otherwise more enjoyable series?
The tag matches continue, with it being Netto and Male versus Midori and Hinoken. A match made possible by the tournament staff deciding to roll back in several of the competitors who lost in the prior rounds due to all the antics of Stone and Bomberman. And yes, the World 3 agents hacked the selection randomizer program for that additional chance, in an extended sequence of their viruses having an all-out brawl with the system that's just wasteful. Though to further pad their odds, Mahajirama ambushes Higure, and he disguises himself as the Chip Otaku in order to deliver another ace in the hole.
世界に2枚とない最強の攻撃用バトルチップ。その名もスーパーグレイトホワイトエンジェルチップでます。
Which is handed over to Male and Roll. Though in doing so, he's stuck doing commentary with Midori Kawa on the match, while Count Elect sets up his own part of the plan. And it's needed, as with their earlier issues worked out, Roll and Rockman work well in tandem with each other to boost the power of their chips, whereas Midori and Hinoken do not. Their own attempts to use their elemental tower chips conflicting with one another.
Something that is surprising for a few reasons. 1. Midori has used both fire and aqua towers together. If it's not on the chip listing, yeah, she's not shown slotting them, so I can't exactly count them consistently. And create attacks with Color Man that actually combo the two to not disrupt the performance of the other, as was going to be showcased in an earlier bout with Male and Roll, so it shouldn't be a difficult thing to adapt that to the Fire Specialist. 2. All 4 of the World 3 net operators are working together on their current plot, so teamwork between them is more than possible. And 3. Again, she has fire chips to make use of. Fire plus fire means stronger fire.
I mean, you'd think they would have better planned this out, especially as Netto and Male far better chain combo their chips without any prior planning, and yet the older operators aren't as capable at the same. Though it might have all been just a ruse to make them think they had the upper hand before turning the tables, making Male want to use the White Angel chip. Also, their trap could be sprung, and for them to directly hack the operation of Roll herself.
And thus resulting in something that has gotten a bit of mimetic infamy even beyond fans of the Battle Network series, and usually for the wrong reasons. And by wrong, I mean fetish fuel. Meet the Dark Dominatrix Empress Roll. You'd think I was joking, but no. Incidentally, congratulations! This is one of the cited inspirations for the Dark Chip story device.
Yeah, this was brought to us by screenwriter Kenichi Yamada. And by looking up his credits, he seems to have a thing for at least some form of fetish fuel iconography or moment across his body of work, whether it be Digimon Data Squad or Cardfight Vanguard with the fan service. But this is the one out of all of them that's bafflingly lived in infamy. It's actually kind of funny with how the series later develops and Roll becoming the second most recurring story Navi behind Blues in the anime, and her later prominence in Team Cross Fusion. Yet as opposed to the two guys, she's the first one that's forced to turn bad over malevolent influence despite the longer arcs that feature Dark Blues and Dark Rockman.
What, do you think I'm lying about Yamada's tendency towards fetish fuel? He also wrote the episode where all the Navis get turned into cats, and the Hot Springs episode that introduced Tamako and Access, which makes it seem like she was hitting on Netto, though those are both happening later. It's kind of heavily featured in things he writes. Though honestly, I think giving Roll the heels in her dark makeover was the step too far. Granted, the White Angel, actually the Devil Chip, isn't quite a dark chip. Yet. While it gives Roll a more twisted demeanor, most of what she does is just suggestions executed by Elect through his hijacking operation of her,
So despite the proclamations of her now being free of all influence thanks to the chip, and instead free to enslave others such as the viruses she normally charms, it's actually the opposite, and she's now a puppet on strings. And worse, Male can't remove the chip.
ダメだよ僕たち同じチームなんだロールちゃんロール様よこの程度なのロックマンつまんないそろそろとどめさしちゃおうかな
You can't tell me this isn't what it so plainly is. Once again, this is split over 2 episodes when, honestly, the plot could have fit into one if it weren't padded. But episode 19 wasn't done by Kenichi Yamada, but Keiichi Hasegawa. And quirks and oddities in his work Hasegawa has, but he's not normally known for emphasizing sexy or fetish stuff. Usually it's the opposite. As a result, Roll's dominatrix act, while enslaved to the World 3 side, yeah, that's gone in the episode that resolves all of this, with their friends rushing off to ask Higure what the hell's up with the chip he gave Male, as the 3 World 3 controlled nabbies proceed to beat the ever-loving crap out of Rockman. Mahajirama, however, outs himself once more as behind all of this the second he gets a chance to escape the commentary booth, as in his cover, he had 0 capabilities to do his job. Again, an oddity considering he hosted a ridiculously successful TV show. Seriously, even in the 50s when there were fewer network stations, no one had 95% viewership for a given time slot. With their interference confirmed, they find the signal that's controlling Roll and attempt to disrupt it, all while Rockman's stuck facing 3 enemies, and unable to find it within himself to actually deal any damage to the controlled Roll, even after Male gives them her consent in doing so. But it's the old heroic catch-22. You don't want to attack your friend because they're brainwashed, even though you won't be able to beat the guys brainwashing her to undo the brainwashing unless you beat them into the ground.
Well, look at it this way. At least it's not a Massacre Princess incident. I could have a commentary in Code Geass at some point.
So all you can do is buy time until the others find and deal with Count Elect's tampering, dodging attacks between Fireman and Colorman to make them hit each other, and worsen the feuding between Midori and Hinoken. So they basically go about being themselves until Rockman can force Colorman to log out. But before he can get Fireman as well, Roll intercedes and grabs him, where from there we have one of the expected cliches. Speaking to the heart of someone you love to pull them back from the darkness and cruelty they've succumbed to.
よかったロールちゃん
なんてね
Yeah, for all the flack I've given Hasegawa's bad work, there's still a reason I appreciate the guy, and it's these moments where he appropriately screwed with expectations.
Yae and company find Alec, who runs and escapes using the same balloon from his prior Spotlight episode, but in doing so, it knocks the kids in the storage room where Higure was stashed, waking him up, which results in him wandering into the stadium and explaining that a malfunctioning, faulty, or jammed chip like the Devil Chip, yeah, can be ejected from this model of PT and the data transmission overridden simply by slotting in another chip. Male does so, freeing Roll from her Empress form and blasting Fireman with a Cyclone once more out of the competition. However, the hijacking and side effects of the Devil Chip have left Roll's programming in terrible condition, so she's out of the running for the tournaments. Thus, for the second time, Rockman needs a new partner to progress in it. Fortunate that Enzan just crushed not just his competition, but deleted his ally's Navi with the friendly fire that resulted.
次はお前と戦う番かもしれないな。
望むところだぜ
The wrap-up. One new battle chip used in the Devil Chip that I will always believe was repurposed narratively into the Dark Chips down the line. There's nothing that says it wasn't, and no one has told me otherwise. Plus, Longsword finally got used on its own outside of the Life Sword cast, so that's good. We have a simultaneous Take a Walk on the Wild Side and Join the Dark Side, we have Cookies award, for Roll Going Evil. We have The Lewd-Minded Will Remember This Forever, once more going to Roll Going Evil. I still find new art of Roll's Empress transformation on occasion on DeviantArt when I look up art for the Battle Network franchise. We have the Continuity Time Bomb, for both Count Elect's Lightbulb Balloon and also the Robot Fish incidents, with the one that chased Mesa that he skewered on top of a tower, now repurposed into his own mode of transportation to interrupt Alec when he attempts to escape into the sky. Again, this is why Mesa works better if he actually used a sea life-based codename, instead of one that called upon cattle meat. This two-parter is obviously polarizing for some. On one hand, you have something interesting to shake up the monotony of a tournament arc again. On the other, antagonists using these kinds of controlling tactics in such a scenario are not new. Evil Rule is fun in short bursts, but there just isn't the drama behind it that would later be invoked by the Dark Blues and Dark Rockman storylines in Axis and Stream, to say nothing of their game counterparts. Dark Blues just being cold anger personified, while Dark Rockman later on has more overt sadism saturating every action of his being as a true dark reflection. Empress Roll ain't bad, and the more lewd side of fandom obsessions won't let it go, but it once more felt like filler padding out the tournament, as opposed to getting on with the show. It is time for the semifinal matches to start up, with Stone and Bomberman versus Rockman and Blues, the solo navies gloating of their operating superiority straight off the bat.
通常ネットナビは砲撃に際しオペレーター判断チップ転送という手順を踏むでます。しかし自立型ネットナビはその必要がないだけ。
And yet neither of you have been able to win a fight without cheating, almost as if your independence restricts your ability to strategize in the moment. Plus, with the synchronization both Enzan and Netto have trained to possess with their navies, that operator delay is practically nil as long as they keep coming up with ways out of a given predicament. From there, it's just a matter of chip versatility and availability. The problem, of course, is going to be Enzan, for as already has been shown, he doesn't work well in teams. Period. Though there's other issues to sort out before we can get to that. Namely, Yaito.
エンザのどこがいいのよ、あんなドキザ男。
He's partnered with the Navi equivalent of one of the most popular characters in the Mega Man franchise. His character's color palette is excellent. Hell, I wanted to cosplay as him when I was younger and just couldn't find the right camo pants and the right color of jacket back then to do it. Or get the hair dye right, for that matter. And he's competent at his hobby, which is appealing.
Yeah, Yaito's still holding a grudge over the other night.
Joke's on you, you spend most of the series with a crush on him, despite people who stuck with the series later preferring to ship him with Netta when she became a recurring character in Access onwards.
But who should overhear this but Enzan himself, as he wanted to have a word with Netto, asking he not screw around as he has a tendency to, and did in the prior battles, as otherwise he'd drag them both down. A fair reason, which is delivered in the wrong way, because it conflicts with encouragement that Mesa just gave, but his statements are in no way wrong. Mesa told Netto that his bond with Rockman is one of his strengths, but it is not his only strength. Becoming too reliant on only one thing harms you in the long run, and we've seen that before with how Netto's been improving other skills he can have available in order to get Life Sword to work.
デリートされたくなければ隅に引っ込んでることだ。
Yeah, right. Like it would be worth it to end up in the finals if he didn't do any of the work to get there. After all, wasn't that what you were criticizing him over before, Enzan? Not putting in the effort to earn his place?
Of course, this encounter riles Yaito up immensely, as during it he keeps insulting Yaito's family and their business, as just being third-rate.
Again, meta-humor, considering Capcom sits behind Square Enix, Bandai Namco, Activision, Electronic Arts, Ubisoft, Sony's Entertainment Division, Atlus, Tencent, Konami, Take-Two Interactive, Warner Interactive Entertainment. Yeah, the list goes on for a while. Even in the 2000s, Capcom's market share had massively shrunk, as while they still put out games annually, a lot of them were not considered up to snuff or quality, and their rating has diminished over time by them not trying to keep going their signature IPs or being reliant on other partnerships to produce content, i.e. the Vs. Capcom series, or even contracting other game developers such as CyberConnect for Ashura's Wrath to make games for them. Hell, even Sega, that's notoriously thought of as a joke to many gamers due to their mascot character Sonic being a long string of awful games, has been going better than Capcom has, due to the production of subsidiaries they own like Atlus with their Shin Megami Tensei franchise, or the massive recent revival and popularity and attention given to the Yakuza games, particularly the excellent spin-off from it, Judgment, which my roommates actually played. In 2019, Capcom earned 94.5 billion yen, against Sega's earnings of 219 billion, over twice Capcom's take, and all because they better supported their intellectual properties. So yeah, that's some real-world humor that's been brought into this series, as if Sega can make that much more than them and is considered a third-rate game company, then Capcom sure as hell is. Oh, here we go.
Yeah, Yaito isn't thinking this through out of anger. Glide is not a combat-oriented net navi. As I joked about in the Battle Network games, Glide is literally useless, and he doesn't even exist to battle or give up a navi chip. All he does is exist. The only way Yaito ever does anything as a result to be helpful or win as a result is all reliant on her use of an extensive array of rare battle chips which compensates for that against normal opponents. Glide doesn't have the speed, power, or tenacity to survive otherwise. Blues, on the other hand, is super specialized specifically for combat, to the point in the games he can't retract his sword arm to stop it from being a sword. You can see how that ends up from the outset, and thankfully the show avoids providing Enzan with another excuse to curb stomp someone. Instead, Enzan being called away by his father, while Yaito goes to cool her head by drinking herself silly at an underwater bar.
Not like that!
ムカつくときはこのホテルのいちご牛乳が一番なの。
Yes, that is clearly strawberry milk. And not a metaphor for anything else.
But the business Enzan was called away for leaves him at the same location simply so he can act as a proxy for his father in signing a business deal. As well, it's later shown his dad's still a neglectful dick. He is more reasonable in actually giving Enzan duties to fulfill once he shows the capability to act responsibly in adult matters. This leads to Yaito, in her still anchor-dredged mindset, to stalk the guy, only for them to both get trapped in an elevator together when a system malfunction jams it and locks them in.
そろそろ手を離してもいいだろう。
For once, this isn't World 3 sabotage, though. Just a normal power failure leaving them trapped. Enzan deciding to take the hard way out and just climb the remainder of the elevator shaft out to make it to the match in time. Yaito obstinately tagging with as she doesn't want to appear weak, and she has to use the bathroom again.
Girl, learn to go before you leave.
However, the more hostile sea life outside the tube freaks her out. Enzan showing his softer side to once more show he's not as massive a dick as his game counterpart at the same relative point in their stories. And there's usually a logic to his conduct, as stilted and rough as it can be in social situations.
下を見るな。さ、登れ。
And Yaito returns the favor given by transporting him back to the arena before time is up, just lacking the battleships needed to be able to use the life sword.
でもどこ行ってたの？
ちょっとデートをな。
The wrap-up. Netto and Rockman used life sword twice on screen in training. That was the extent of battleship use this time. We have a Soon Soon award for Yaito towards Enzan. Though to be fair, Yaito's younger than everyone else and is more of a brat in general, so it's not like I actually like you, Baka, and more someone setting her off by being more blasé in response to her antics. Past this point, yeah, Yai ends up crushing on Enzan due to this encounter and the kindness he showcased. It coming off as him letting down his own more stoic defenses just for her. Though of course, nothing comes of it beyond a minor love triangle only brought up once or twice later. One of which being in a dumb beach episode. Once more, this is nothing more than a filler piece padding out the tournament arc now that they are about to wrap it up, but a needed one. As since his introduction, the presented character of Enzan keeps swaying oddly between rival, more experienced senpai, and secondary antagonist for Netto and co. And really all that comes together under a viewpoint that he's just socially awkward and not used to dealing with such situations. Thus goes in the attack and retaliation, alongside having high expectations of others. Even if Yaito's family corporation was a good company, without someone good to run it, of course it'd be third-rate. For someone to toot their own horn at others' accomplishments, flout money and resources that are only their families and not their own as if they achieved it themselves, of course it would get under his skin as someone who had to comparatively work hard to get where he is and earn the rights to the things he has and are expected of him. The episode is good because it contrasts Yaito's brattiness with Enzan's showcasing of noblesse oblique, the responsibility of the privileged to act with generosity to those with less. Enzan's not quite perfect on that himself, to be fair, since he can still be quite mean, but again, he's not good in social situations. It is a repeated defense of his actions, I'll give you, but it is an accurate one.
Would have been nice had they showcased that in the previous incidents instead of it being a new hurdle with these guys. Might have been better to have highlighted that in the last match Netto had with them instead of the pair, cheating.
So once again, it's time for the semifinals, and with no further delay, the match gets underway. And Rockman's chip supply just isn't enough to do much to the auto navies. Stoneman blocking heavy attacks, while Bombman just keeps throwing bombs. And Blues doing nothing to help, as the factual reaction time of the auto navies takes its toll, as Netto can't keep pace to slot chips and counter their movements.
And this is where Enzan and Blues actually decide to, do something.
邪魔だ。デリートされないように引っ込んでろ。
Once again, dick move.
Of course, as said, the big deal is Blues and Enzan are just so bad at working with anyone else that his capabilities are hindered if he's not acting solo. It becoming a matter of being cruel to be kind, in the right measure.
Some consider it a very good sign.
And sure enough, Blues' sword is sharp enough to cut Stoneman's blocks and Bombman's bombs. Having, from observation of them fighting Rockman, figured out their attack pattern to be able to keep pace and counter them with a twin sword whirlwind. Rockman likewise rejoining the fight and paralyzing Stoneman, so Blues has a better chance to take Bomberman out, slicing him to pieces. Though as he's crushed right after, potentially at the cost of Rockman.
忠告を無視するからだ。隣でわめかれるのは迷惑だ。今はネットバトルの途中なんだ。
Nah, it's a fake out, though one to set up the possibility that net battles can result in a Navi's deletion. That ultimately is to Blues' disadvantage, as Stoneman's hide is too strong for him to cut.
パラディンソード。
Okay, maybe not.
Actually, no. Stoneman can reassemble himself when he's cut by normal battle chip attacks. They're the wrong type of weapon to use against him, as he's based off an older magical golem, with his main core sealed under all the rock being his one weakness. You need something that can deal massive damage all at once, and unfortunately, Enzan's too late, realizing he's missing a single copy of Wide Sword, so can't cast Life Sword, and is too prideful to borrow Netto's. Fortunately, this is where Rockman re-enters things, just having been buried under the virus, with Netto sending him a crap ton of mini-bombs to blow his way out. And with this, he finally gets a chance to show off the results of his training. Netto and Rockman finally casting a mastered version of Life Sword that forces the match in their favor, exposing the Court of Blues as he cuts it in twain, and straight up deleting this version of Stoneman. Meaning, it is Enzan and Netto facing off at the end of it all.
As people familiar with the series expected from the start.
The wrap-up. Stoneman's use of Gaia Hammer is our new battle chip of the episode, with everything else seen before. Though to be fair, this is where we see the most of Enzan's chip library, including his rare Paladin sword, and Blues' recurring penchant for dual-wielding them.
Fun fact, I had some of the figures from the NT Warrior toy line. They got lost in a move in 2005, and I've never found any of them since, so I think the box itself that contained them got lost. And I had the Proto-Man figure, and would do exactly that when I posed them on my desk.
There are many like it, for this one is mine. To Enzan and Blues and the aforementioned preference for swords, just refusing to use ones that aren't their own. We have My Blade is My Pride, to Blues and exclusively using sword chips. You're going to want to diversify eventually, dude. We have the Tatsumaki Award for creating a twister out of movement, again to Blues with his sword techniques. We have a premature explosion, to Bomberman for being the first one thrown out of battle. And we have a death warning flag, to Rockman and making people think he was dead, on the eve of the tournament arc's end in the mid-season climax. Well, once again a big battle episode, thus making for less to recap, this one was fun. It being a culmination of expectations with a mostly proper payoff. Albeit with how much Stone and Bomberman have been built up, the results in battle with them mostly being a curb stomp for them against Rockman. And the reverse against Blues isn't the greatest thing. Yeah, Blues and Enzan are supposed to be strong, but after Netto and Rockman's own efforts to improve themselves thus far, it is not an insurmountable one going into the finals. It makes the resultant outcome of what should happen more predictable, and thus the only way to get true surprise out of it would be to throw out something completely unexpected that might risk just straight undermining the arc with how, from out of left field, it enters the picture as.
And unfortunately, that is exactly what ends up happening.
So it's finally time. The match for all the marbles. Netto getting hyped by all his friends and supporters that believe, or at least tolerate the possibility in Miyuki's case, of him going for the win. Whereas to contrast once again, Enzan is all alone.
伊集院Enzan! あんたなんかネットにやられちゃえでも、ちょっとだけなら応援してあげる
ガキの喧嘩をショーアップするなんざマネーの無駄ナンセンスだわさ
You're just saying that because you got your ass handed to you by said kids. So the fight starts and, once again, Rockman's too slow.
アクアソードスロットイン
However, as the fight ramps up, something begins to happen on the barge the N1 stadiums are built atop of, destabilizing them. As if all the combat has worked to wake something up. Though Netto using enough bombs to be mistaken for a grenadier probably isn't helping the stability of local cyberspace. Not like it's much help, you never use a grenade on a fast enemy, they just skate around the explosions.
No, you need mines to ambush a speedster.
Though how Netto evades the perfectly timed counterattack in turn is a bit baffling.
バカな俺の計算では避けることなど不可能なはず
俺の得意科目は図工と体育計算とか算数とかは超嫌いだぜレッド君そんなこと言っちゃダメ
Though the somewhat amusing thing here is, since these chips all play by the Battle Network 1 and 2 rules of conduct, we could have seen another program advance early in the season between Enzan and Protoman's Fire and Aqua Swords, and Netto and Rockman's Elect Sword. Bamboo Sword hadn't been created yet for Element Sword, but Life Sword 2 was at the time still plausible.
Hell, if memory serves, I haven't watched the back half of Season 1, so I might be wrong on this, and I apologize if I am in advance. They didn't include the Battle Network 2 exclusive Element Blades for Life Sword 3 until the adaptation of Access.
But yeah, there's a certain type of dumb challenging a sword specialist with a sword weapon, though even martial arts experts admit you only need to worry of the most trained and the worst trained of any specialty. However, due to the sports breaking under the stadium...
皆さん緊急事態ですベガフロートはジャッキアップシステムを何者かに破壊され間もなく海に沈みます
Then why the hell did they even build this stadium out in the middle of the sea if there was such a risk of that happening? Even artificial cities surrounded by nothing but water at the very least build atop some form of formative landmass that's just under the water. This is a location that'll only be used for rare events to begin with. This is not Water 7 from One Piece!
Now, if you're short on space for such a location, fine. Just build it just adjacent to the shoreline on struts if you need to, or dredge up some dirt to support it. But this place is deep out in the water for what looks to be a pretty significant drive. The only reason to place this all so far out is to make it a death trap.
It seems specifically odd to me, considering Japan's propensity for constructing artificial islands and outcroppings for such facilities in the past, which then have commercial and residential sections just pop up all around it. The most significant one I'm familiar with, outside of fiction, being Odaiba in Tokyo's Bay. Originally constructed from reclamated land in the 1860s for military purposes, it was expanded upon into a shipyard and harbor, before the aftermath of World War II caused it to shift into a business district with commerce and tourism following after. Case in point, that's where the 1-1 scale Unicorn Gundam is set up.
But this place by comparison, yeah, it was clear was set up to fail from the beginning. If the facility being used for its intended purpose or something the system screwing with its suspension is causing the entire artificial island to collapse. Congratulations, tournament runners! You could not have failed at this entire enterprise more if you tried.
ワールド3に決まってんじゃない違うわよ
俺たちも一緒に逃げてんだぞ No, no, no!
Good guess, but not quite.
Now you would think the place literally collapsing around them would cause a disruption that Netto and Enzan would break from their net battle. But instead, they're trapped on the sinking artificial island, as on top of the structure collapsing, the roadway does as well.
And this is why I'm never traveling to the Florida Keys. I have enough of a problem driving over elevated highways, or walking across any bridge. Stupid marquee interchange and my persistent acrophobia.
So seriously, with all their lives in danger, why did Midorikawa not just call the match? Hell, why are she and Higure still freaking there? They're the ones who called for the evacuation!
こうなったら私緑川ケロも実況をやめるわけにはいきません
You've called matches for less.
Despite that though, this is arguably the best animation's been for action all season yet, as each short section of the fight actually is shown. Seriously, I keep complaining about Zipek's animation with this series, but it's only because I know they can do better than they often do. The fact the shading for animation in this series is actually really good and better than a lot of digitally drawn animation of the time with it applying character shades and appropriate color balance, which was often lost early on with a number of animation studios when they took the change to digital animation over hand-drawn. Back to the story though, Enzan's surprised that despite his and Blue's superior skill, then Netto and Rockman are finally succeeding keeping up with them in combat. The fights, and possibly the stakes as well, finally drawing out the competitor Enzan had originally come to find. Their bond matching Enzan's operation technique. You know, basic will of the heart crap common to these kinds of series. Which of course brings it down to one final clash of program advances. But sadly, it just wasn't enough by the end. While everything Netto and Rockman have gone through have made them Enzan and Blues' equal, they still haven't had the time to experience operating at that level to entirely close the gap. Thus, with Rockman collapsing in exhaustion, Blues and Enzan are the winners of the N1 Grand Prix.
Time up! Rockman tatemasen!
Wait, there was a time limit to after a Navi collapses? Then why wasn't Rockman disqualified when it took him forever to get out from under the Quake viruses in the battle against Stone and Bomberman? They're just making up the rules as they go along at this point. Hell, the Red Tone pair even once more break from the jerk facade to speak respectfully to them on how close it was. Enzan and Blues never having to work anywhere near as hard to win as they did here. There's definitely respect and expectations of standards restored and reevaluated from this. So yeah, tournament over. Now can they get the hell out of here before they die? Like, when something falls into the sea, water displacement tends to drag anything above it down with. See? Told you! And then suddenly, Pharaoh Man. Yeah, this Navi's the reason why the building started to collapse. Why? Good question. Because beyond Wily gleefully laughing about him being the ultimate Navi, there is no explanation. The wrap-up. Debut chip of the episode was Aqua Sword. Knew they'd get to it eventually. We have a pointlessly suicidal death battle award to Netto and Enzan for not putting their match on hold until they were out of danger. We have Unsafety First, a category shamelessly stolen from SF Debris' opinionated reviews to describe the just plain horrible construction of the N1 Grand Prix tournament grounds. Some poor taxpayers are going to have to eat the check for that place, so I hope it was insured. We have Where the Budget Went, to the battle between Blues and Rockman, and a reduction in quality for other sects of the season, and this episode to animate it well. And we have the 11th hour plot twist, for Pharaoh Man literally coming in out of nowhere. Arguably, this was the best episode thus far. Finally, you have a proper face-off between Rockman and Blues at the finals that pushed the pair to their current full capabilities, which only still go up from here. After all, Rockman still doesn't have his styles, souls, or crosses, nor is Blues yet a more self-actualized Navi to do more than obey. When you first see this when you're younger as well, you don't expect the rug being pulled under you by Rockman getting deleted like this either. Well, yeah, had the Battle Network games not continued for 4, 5, and 6, Hubs' death at the end of 3 is pretty shocking, and a disturbingly somber note of finality if you don't go for the secret completion ending. You don't expect a show like this to have to do a Lazarus of the Week plot for the freaking main character before its story arc had been concluded, let alone before the midpoint in the first season. You usually expect it as an attention-grabbing cliffhanger before the final power-up, or as part of a series' climax, where they rise from the grave with even greater power conviction than before. And this really does not count as either, despite the first arc now entering its 3-part endgame. Hopefully they'll actually bother to explain Pharaoh Man showing up out of nowhere when they do. Hopefully they'll bother to actually explain Pharaoh Man showing up out of nowhere when they do. 私の生まれた場所
私はその場所に戻らねばならぬ。王としてこの世界を支配するために。
Do you have any openings for genetically altered mice? They might be able to help you with that. We open at Scilab, who are already on the case of figuring out what the hell happened at the N1, finding that a net navi created 20 years in the past has broken free and run rampant there. Though from evidence of where it was sealed, an isolated microchip far away physically from anything electronic it could potentially interact with, good luck convincing me how the hell he got out of there. Though this is a problematic bit of continuity for some, considering the differences between the anime and both the games and manga. After all, in the game and manga side of the Battle Network timeline, the modern network through which all Navi technology and cyber hardware had been developed has only existed for around 12 to 15 years or so, with Tadashi Ikari alongside Dr. Wily still being behind most of it, and Yuichiro being the technological programmer and engineer behind the mass-produced NetNavi AIs. Sure, there were some he had no hand in developing, Base.exe being the prime example of there being Navis before him, and more drone-like basic Navis also in existence in Base's time, but the Navi technology wasn't exactly in enough hands to create something this crazy strong. Hell, it's established that's why Base has a ridiculous advantage over other Navis made after him that was just from the sheer amount of raw data he's absorbed in the time he survived in the internet. Since otherwise the crazy strong stuff originated as viruses or aberrant data anomalies like Alpha and the Cyber Beasts. The easiest way to reconcile that preconception then, as I pretty regularly need to do in returning to the early days of the .exe anime, is to remember two important details. 1. Battle Network 3, which was responsible for providing a number of those backstory details which weren't covered in Battle Networks 1 or 2, had not yet been released. And unlike .hacks IMAC continuity, where the Sign anime was written by the same person as the games, and the tie-in manga had its writer aware of the story points so his tale wouldn't conflict with them, I am almost damn certain that Capcom wasn't giving backstory details to the anime's writers. Unless they were using something already publicly accessible, they were on their own. Thus, differences from expectations is going to occur, for better and for worse. And the timeline under which the network was developed is thus different in this universe than that of the game or manga, which more closely related themselves. And more importantly, 2. They retcon and expand upon it later to reduce the inconsistencies. Yes, seriously, it happens in stream as part of a time travel plot. Long story behind that, but there they try and showcase the differences to reconcile the problem. And when someone sends back future knowledge and gear, they do so in a way where it doesn't screw over the timeline. Certainly utilizing such a plot point more responsibly than a half dozen other series I could name that are more recent than stream on that. Anyways, yeah, Pharaoh's free after 20 years in the digital Huskau, and he wants his kingdom back, basically taking over the role of Alpha and things in this series, as the network management program Alpha was not yet a thing. But yeah, this is apparently what Wily's been after, a Navi bearing some form of ultimate program he wants to obtain. But again, for no explicable reason stated. His minions are ready to go try and capture him, which Wily completely shuts down. With all their scheming, they couldn't even take down Rockman, which Pharaoh one-shotted. Though to be fair, Rockman's HP was likely past the red line, so it was more like he stole their kill, not defeating him in one shot when his HP was full. Note to self for future consideration, a Battle Network hard mode variant where you don't obtain any non-progression blocking character upgrades. What, you have to complete the jobs board to access the secret areas in Battle Network 3. Some of those completion rewards include HP memories. Would probably serve as a harder task than some people's Pokemon game Nuzlocks. Plus, you could look at it this way, Wily appearing to give a damn about his subordinates. At least more than it usually seems. Instead, he has a plan, and that plan is data cloning. And people complain that the original season didn't do that when Access, Stream, and Beast made use of data clones. So Wily sends out his army in the hunt for the Pharaoh, unaware he's been stuffed into a broken puzzle for 5,000 years. Still, it's been some time since the N1's conclusion, and Netto's still down the dumps over failing to jack Rockman out before Fireman attacked. Like his game self just going through the motions as he flashes back to everything that's changed in however much time has passed since Yuichiro sent him the Navi. Time is weird in this series. There is nothing more to say about it beyond it progresses. Pharaoh hacks back into Scilab.
where much of its resources to take over inevitably are held due to their research in technology and barricaded storage of dangerous hardware and experiments.
And if you look to your left, we have our experimental dimensional area generator, but it won't be ready for testing for another 7 months.
However, as night falls, a new icon appears on Netto's MTPT, half of the Hikari emblem spinning in place. It's the beginning of a special recovery program for Rockman's data, meaning if they do things right, they might just be able to restore him. Problem is, the program is fragmented and dispersed itself onto all the PETs of Netto's friends and most frequent contacts, meaning it will require gathering them all to perform a proper data recovery. And the inability for any of them to interact with it means they've got to get someone who knows what it actually is to assemble the data. Though before that can happen, Enzan contacts Netto, and in his own way thanks Netto for Rockman saving Blues. When the attack happened, he legitimately expected Blues to be the one to be deleted. And in the wake of seeing Netto shut down, he couldn't lie to himself. Had that been Blues that died, he'd likely be even worse off than him. After all, Blues is the closest thing to a friend he's ever had, and he treats him more like a servant than the confidant he is. After Netto showed him how powerful a bond can be, well, he's got a lot to reconsider about how he acts, and if Netto needs his help, he shouldn't hesitate to call. He's earned that.
Enzan's arc for self-improvement, while not touched on much until Access, starts much earlier, and from a more balanced position than his game's counterpart. Again, with the anime's advantage of being able to spend more time with the character to give them better showcased intentions. The worst I'd call it during the first season is, depending on writer, he has a tendency to backslide in his conduct. Which, honestly, feels natural, as sometimes a lesson learned or implementing a change is hard to perform if the reasons why you act a certain way is ingrained or exists for a reason.
So, it's here we get more explanation about Fireman. 12 years before the series events,
you guys said at the beginning that he's been locked up for 20, and I checked, this wasn't a translation error. The beginning of the episode said he'd been imprisoned for 20 years, and now they specifically say 12 years in this exposition dump. So how could he do anything 12 years ago if he's been locked up for 20? Again, retcon fixed this down the line.
Anyways, back whenever he did this, Fireman attacked the entire network, quickly usurping control over the entire network as his dominion. They do not explain how it was stopped, though, merely that whatever did it fragmented his data. Data that it made part of itself after absorbing it into his own perfection. And
he still has that library book! Also, again, confusion over the time frame.
The Navi was created as a management system to keep the world's data in line, but processing all that raw information is ultimately what drove it nuts to try absorbing and controlling everything. Not just making sure everything ran smoothly. Really, his desire is nothing more of an outreach of that, wanting to enslave everything simply so it would run without complications. Also known as what the Mama organization in .hack was trying to do before that entire plot was revealed to be stupid.
He basically fell prey to the Skynet trap of not being smart enough to think of another solution outside of kill all humans.
With its rampancy ultimately being the result of a virus. Like with Alpha in the main game timeline, Tadashi Hikari was on the development team for Pharaoh, and is the one ultimately responsible for stopping him and sealing him away.
Even Mason now agrees it's supposed to be 20. Was this just a scripting fail? Okay, yeah, I'm betting it was. Keiichi Hasegawa wrote this one, and that happens on occasion in his script adaptations if something's different from a presented source material or series outline bible if he's working off of that. Case in point, the many focus conflicts between episodes he did and did not write of Kamen Rider Ghost, mainly because the main writer of Kamen Rider Ghost kept leaving the series, and when he'd come back, he'd screw with everything. The theory Mesa's running with for how Pharaoh's back, though, does not make sense, it being the clash of power released from Rockman and Blues and their battle being what did it. But that doesn't work as Pharaoh was on a data chip not physically connected to the network. Now, if this Pharaoh that's active right now was not the one sealed in the chip, but in fact made up of remnant data scattered across the network that then found itself drawn back together by the powerful clashes in the tournament, and the other intensive chaos around Akihara before then, that would make more sense. Battle Network 1 had introduced by this point the concept of remnant and ghost data for defeated Navis scattered across the network, only to reform at random. So, Remnant trying to return to the whole? There are worse explanations. Hell, scattered Remnant data is exactly what they're going to use to remake Rockman, but that's not what they say is going on.
And it probably would have been best for Mace to have given this exposition dump immediately, as Fireman, as it regains control, uses worldwide environmental controls to recreate the 10 plagues of Egypt. Something Wiley rejoices over when he sees it, as this is exactly the anarchy he wanted people to suffer from, in his own aims to conquer the world. Meanwhile, Netto's friends all show him the emblems in their PTs, resulting in them resonating and tipping them off properly to the recovery code, them connecting all the PTs to transfer them all to Netto's, restoring the core emblem, and with them, all of Rockman's memories. And who better to finish the job they've started than the returning Yuichiro Hikari. The wrap-up. We have Adaptation Fail, for confusion over the timeline this series follows under. We have God Complex, for Pharaoh and Dr. Wily, who wants to enslave a digital god to become a god. I'd say this is as stupid as when .hack tried to do it with the Mama Conspiracy, but at least the .exe anime gets a pass on the idea in retrospect, since the dimensional area tech allowing for the fusion of the real and cyber worlds isn't that far from entering use. And in a way that was in no way as stupid as how real digitalization has been made use of. This was a needed downtime episode to get everyone up to speed, for Netto to have his all is lost moment over Rockman's loss, and have the hope to move forward again. We've got Enzan's beginnings of his longer arc, and while he actually gets a motivation alongside showing a more positive time with his followers that isn't berating them or throwing them to the wolves for once. While I say this season sucks, it's mainly because we have to sit through a lot of bad in order to get to the few better moments. And this finale to the first half of the series certainly is one of those times.
パパがママのミートスパゲッティを食べたいっていう時は本気なの。
Haruka, your son is 11. It is probably not the right time for this conversation.
As Yuichiro explains, while Netto's recovered all of Rockman's memory data, to finish the process of restoring him, they need to find the frame, the body he actually uses and is represented by. And since Yuichiro made him at Scilab, then that's likely the place the ghost data for such is returned to.
The problem is, Scilab has been taken over by Pharaoh Man. Whoops.
Though Yuichiro does know some back doors into the system, he just needed computer resources, which Yaito can supply, and the assistance of their navis to lift the lockdown protections to the frame data. And even then, with how Pharaoh is twisting the network, to the point even manual access is impossible to Scilab right now, it won't be easy. The fact that Riley could even send his army in to face Pharaoh, though, shows the rogue Navi doesn't have full control yet, so all it'll require is sneaking in without notice. After all, I think Pharaoh would care less about intruders that have no intention of doing anything to him, as opposed to active infidels. Though to help with that, well, we get another agent of irritants from Yuichiro, gifting his future daughter-in-law, come on, we all know it, with a support program that'll help them find Rockman's frame. Meet Rush.exe. Rush is nothing but an annoyance, and not one just limited to the cyberspace environment. Somehow, someway, it figures out how to bioemerge itself into the real world in the second half of the season, and never ceases to screw with things after that. It's another thing that gets dialed back in Access, but his presence makes for some bad events, and also some story arc content. It is because of him that Navis eventually learn how to realize themselves in the real world without the dimensional area technology, putting the heroes at a disadvantage at times because of that. While the character is based after both the original one in the main Robots timeline, and one of the support Navi customizer programs usable in versus battles in Battle Network 3 onwards, there was no need to include him. Yeah, Rush was the loyal support dog in the original Mega Man, and there's actually a Rush X variant that was made into a figure to go with the Giga Armor Mega Man X figure I have. The .exe verse in no way needed one as a recurring character that just eats up animation budget. The only positive thing I can say he does is in Strain Keys what allows Male and Roll to eventually be able to perform cross-fusion as he helps her achieve a high enough synchro rate to use a synchro chip. Part of why Rush is annoying, though, is he's used as a cheat button a lot in his early appearances. A way for the cast to get around the obstacles presented in a cheap, lazy, no-effort means of resolution, instead of getting the cast to think clever and improve themselves. It feels like the show was being allowed to stagnate once again, instead of being allowed an even progression over time. Regardless, everyone makes their way to Scilab, including Mesa's net agents by ways of bribing Higure to get them access through the darknet into the place, while Yuichiro guides Team A past the Scilab firewalls into the main server space that now is visually represented by the Sahara Desert. A desert that is populated by land sharks. Because of course it is. But Mesa's team has a different goal in mind than restoring Rockman. They plan to remotely cut power to the place while Pharaoh is still in the stage of regathering his power. Will they lose any unsafe data or anything Pharaoh absorbed externally? Well, they didn't have a lot of options to deal with the rogue Navi spreading like a malignant cancer. Sometimes all you can do is operate and lop off the affected area, no matter what is lost or the damage that would result. Eventually, though, the rescue team gets to the frame data, and Netto transfers the memory data, allowing Yuichiro to recompile Rockman's data. But there's a problem. Something Fireman did made it so there's something still missing, so his body is still inert. And because they got here before the Stone Bomber army could show up, Fireman has no distractions to keep them from dealing with them, setting the digital caves they're in, crushing down upon them.
我が聖地に足を踏み入れた罪万死に値する。死んでもらうぞ。
Oh, now you show up! Gotta say, Wily, you might have not sent enough men. Meh, at least Rockman's body seems okay, so not all is lost. Though by the way he's falling, it seems like he just got stuffed into the opening of a Kingdom Hearts game.
Let's just hope he doesn't find a giant key down there, or music from Utada Hikaru starts playing. It's still half a season yet before he starts having to deal with the Battle Network equivalent of Heartless and Nobodies.
As the final episode of this story dawns, the battle against Fireman and all the Stoneman and Botman clones continues to just go plain badly, with our allies caught in the middle.
There is a reason I love that chip so much.
As I said, it goes badly as, well... that is just plain not fair. With that, just leaving the two originals to face down the might of the Pharaoh.
Guys, quick suggestion. Challenge him to a children's card game. There is a rock deck and explosion burn deck I think guys might really take to. It'd be a hell of a lot better than Yu-Gi-Oh! Reigns at least.
The solo Navis flee, everyone else running as well, but with no other distractions. Well, Pharaoh has more traps that paralyze everyone that's left thanks to the curse virus he can spawn. Meaning this mission on all sides was a total failure. Meaning we have reached...
the all is lost moment!
But wait, we forgot about the net agents Navis, who snuck their way in the back door thanks to Higure, reaching an oasis that contains the shutdown for the security system Pharaoh's hijacked.
Did you lose a golden axe? Or was it a silver axe?
And as the crew points out, if they can shut down Scilab servers while Pharaoh's still in it, and give them even momentarily control back, they can stop his little rampage. Unfortunately, the cursed virus is still roaming, and paralyzing both Woodman and Skullman before Sharkman can key the final sequence, and Sharkman himself only lasting long enough to trigger it before he's taken out as well. It was kind of pointless, though. Pharaoh was tipped off to what they were doing, and prepared a backup to prevent the shutdown, meaning he's free to retaliate, deciding to bring one of Scilab's satellites down on Densan City, the region that contains the suburb of Akihara, where most of the story has taken place up until now.
Yeah, this actually ties back to crap I researched a few years ago. Back when I reviewed Kamen Rakuga in 2014, and Power Rangers Dino Charge at the end of 2017, and as an aside, those videos keep getting claimed by Toei, and I've just given up trying to repost clean versions of them, so if you've not seen them, that would be why. I have no idea if they're even still visible anymore, but I don't earn money off of them at all. Anyways, yeah, I did a bunch of research on the damage space objects hitting the Earth do, and how much force is required to cause explosions of a given size. Thank you, nuclear writer Kick Kuga. And if something is about the size of a car, a minivan at biggest, it burns up in the atmosphere and does basically no damage to anything. At worst with something that size, a very hot rock hits the ground and leaves a small crater. Things the size of a bus or a dump truck, that's a bit more worrying, depending on their total mass. And their mass is actually the problematic part of all this, as something's mass is key to how much damage an object falling from orbit does, depending on its descent angle. Satellites of the type showcased, on average, are about the size of a standard school or public transit bus, and average about 2 to 4 metric tons of mass, which is much less than the mass of a bus, which averages about 12.5 to 16 metric tons. And if it were the weight of a bus, I would be worried, as assuming the best possible conditions, 16 metric tons of force creates an impact crater of 70 meters, roughly 230 feet. But one that's 4 tons? Yeah, no, you're looking at best half that at around 120 feet, which, hey, still a big impact site, but it'd only take down a building or two at most, if, and that is a big if, it managed to not burn up on re-entry to at most pelt people with tiny shrapnel, which a lot of satellites have been designed to do for a couple decades. Again, it depends on the mass of the object, how that mass is distributed in it, how densely assembled the materials are, and the way it re-enters Earth's atmosphere. To tie this to a different discussion I'll have at some point, people critique various aspects of the Gundam franchise, but their mechs that average in the weight range of about 75 tons would actually burn up in the atmosphere, as despite their weight, their entire mass is not dense like a true meteor or asteroid, so come in the wrong way and be forced to fight air friction, and the entire thing would come apart, and little to nothing would hit the ground. This gets shown with satellites and their planned descents by real parties, where the nations of the world direct falling satellites to an uninhabited part of the Pacific Ocean called Point Nemo, and all that ends up landing in this area is a small fraction of its original body that's all just small pieces of scrap metal. So yeah, satellite coming down over a city, it would get people hurt, it would break a few buildings, and the shockwave and sonic boom from its fall would even further expand the property damage, so it is still better to stop it, but it's not exactly cataclysmic conditions like, say, Kamen Rider Kuga's rising form finishing moves, which I used science to determine caused nuclear explosion levels of damage. Hell, since communication channels haven't been blocked, they could possibly evacuate the city before it actually impact. But it still would be better to do something to stop it, though. To at least prevent someone getting hurt, or worse, Fireman hijacking every satellite so he can just try and carpet bomb a populace. But fortunately, there is still at least one Navi that can be relied on to save the day. Except no substitutes, even though Proto Soul in the video games kinda sucks.
デリートの危険もあるが、俺は奴に借りを返さねばならん。
Anime Enzan. Actually a nice guy that doesn't know how to express himself. Resultantly, Enzan and Blues pay their debt by rescuing Rockman's body from being destroyed in digital lava. Yeah, I have no idea. I'm just gonna count it as being surrounded by lava panels. But with the body recovered, Blues draws Pharaoh's attention with his own badass theme. Yeah, I've not mentioned it, but about 2/3 through this arc, the music had a sharp improvement. The production staff finally commissioning someone to provide actual music instead of scores recycled from the 90s Mega Man series, or the instrumental version of this specific series' theme song. It's been improving the experience a lot. Unfortunately, Blues can't fight Fireman forever, leaving it to Netto and company to continuously yell out to Rockman in order to wake him up, which would probably work better if they'd reinstalled his personality files, but what do I know?
Delete.
He's back!
協力してくれ、ブルース。頼む、エンザ。
面白そうだ。
プログラムアドソード。ワイドソード。ロングソード。スロットアイ。ベータソード。
And yeah, even Pharaoh ain't stopping a power that surpasses the system.
It unfortunately doesn't do enough to outright delete him, but it does collapse Fireman's control over Scilab and the satellite, saving it from crashing down. Well, that's the problem. No one voted for you. Unfortunately, Fireman's been weakened enough that Wily can proceed to try and capture the Rogue Control Navi once again, and actually succeeds at it this time. Rockman following after as, yeah, whatever Wily's going to do with him, it can't be good. But rescuing him is held off by a final confrontation with Stone and Bomb Man, allowing Wily to talk to his prisoner and offer him an ultimatum of serving him, which Fireman refuses in every respect, preferring his own death over being forced to serve a human. While Netto has the problem of being unable to send Rockman battleships in this firewalled network.
Netto, style changeを試すんだ。
Style change?
He can do that now? When did you install that?
Style change! Rockman!
And with Rockman now in Heat Gut style, his attack power is completely maxed out and able to punch with the right hand of doom. What? I swear this was influenced by Hellboy. I know of Japanese artists and writers who have openly stated their love of Mike Mignola's BRPD Resident Demon. It is very hard to say the name Mignola. I have no idea if I'm pronouncing it wrong or not. And hell, the hand can also change into a freaking awesome Heat Guts Buster, which acts similar to a Gatling gun for rapid fire energy shots. But it gives Rockman enough of an advantage that he can blow away the solo navies and get out, before Pharaoh sets off the self-destruct in Wily's base in his own effort to escape, ultimately destroying himself in the process. Everyone recovers from the incident, with Netto catching sight of Enzan leaving, unable to thank him properly for what he did, which thus ends the plotline and arc of the series on a positive note. The wrap-up. We have hacking for fun and profit to Higure and Yuichiro, bypassing security for their own ends. We have a Where the Hell Have You Been award to Yuichiro Hikari returning from his random expedition. From this point onwards, Yuichiro would be more of a regular in the cast, though usually more busy with work, so while he's not impossible to reach, he is a bit too busy to be seen frequently. It's more when Netto and Rockman become more permanently involved in the projects he's working on that they are seen together for their interactions. We have Villain Faceplant to Fireman and Wily, with both facing their own mutually assured destruction because they wanted to enslave the other's faction to rule themselves. We have a Lazarus of the Week, yet another category shamelessly stolen from the web reviewer SF Debris, for Rockman, coming back from the dead using his remnant data. May he never be deleted again. And we have a non-ending finale for this, as the series continues on after it, but with no real provided closure. It's just hard to distinguish that this was an actual end to the current state of affairs, and what counts as an adaptation of the first game, and a plot element from the third. So yeah, the first arc ends on a more positive story note than the series began with, but the last episode of it feels just, well, padded with how little happens in it and the pace of it. But it honestly matches what was done before it though, ultimately haphazard between the bad stories, the boring plots, and the very good of character introspective episodes that was the only thing really keeping me going with this. As I've said, this is where I think all the worst stories of the series ended up congregating, and I do believe it's all uphill from here as more and more disliked elements are left behind, with even Fireman coming in as a story arc final boss, not really doing it for a lot of people, since he comes out of complete nowhere with no real build-up to him. As in truth, there's no seeding to his appearance, nor Wily's overall plan through everything actually seeming to lead to anything or anywhere in regards to his actual goals, which helps the story told thus far feel ultimately pointless. It's a poor contrast to his game's incarnation, and getting him out of the spotlight for quite a while after this would actually work in the show's favor to obtain a sense that the antics the cast get up to are more part of the standard daily life of the setting. Again, playing into Zebek's preference for producing anime series that are slice of life, but with one fantastical element mixing things up in the setting throughout. So while I've made it clear I don't care for a lot of this, unfortunately, like, say, Power Rangers, the important building blocks for characters and concepts for the longer series are scattered all over this arc. I just wish it had been cluttered a lot less with things that usually drive me up the wall. As I sit writing this, the first episodes of this little retrospective are actually prepped to make their way to YouTube, and presumably they've all gone over without many issues on ShowPro's part who've been making some claims. If they've been getting hit since this video was made, then this may be the last one I do on this series. But if they've been managing to stay stable on the platform, then I will be all up to continuing on from here. Stay tuned, and we'll see how it all goes in the coming year.